Welcome to the Odds Breakers, number one place for shared, sharp betting information.
All right. Welcome back to podcast 36 of 2020. I'm your host, Kiev O'Neill. You can follow us on Twitter at The Odds Breakers. Follow us on social media /The Odds Breakers. This episode is being brought to you by jazzsports.ag. For a 50% sign-up bonus, please visit Jazz Sports. Use the promo code ODDSBREAKERS. Terms and conditions apply. If you'd like to help us out with our costs and sponsor the podcast, we would love to help you out. Please visit theoddsbreakers.com, click shop, and become a member. For $17.99 a month, you can get my plays and premium plays before the line moves. If nothing else, please visit theoddsbreakers.com and become a free picks newsletter subscriber. My friends, we had a great UFC weekend. 4-0 in premium plays, 5-1 in total plays. Fight night, well, actually it was UFC 251, it was pay-per-view, was amazing. Most of the fights were absolutely awesome, minus the main event. And I'll get to that and do a quick recap of that. But first, I want to let you know that we have a great show for you today. We are going to break down the Pac-12 for this season. I know that the season is in jeopardy. The season has been in jeopardy since March. But I already did my research, and I'm going to share it with you whether you listen to it now or you listen to it a week before the season opens. It doesn't matter. I believe that when the season win totals are changed, whether it be, teams that had 6 are now going to be around 4. 3 games were taken away from these schools, right? 3 games. So there's still some value on trying to predict how well the Pac-12 is going to do with their in-conference games. And I'm sure there's going to be some future odds out soon as well. And I'll tell you kind of the teams that I think that will have some good odds and might be worth taking a shot on. To end up the show, we have our guy, Cub Fan Danny, back to break down UFC Fight Night. Figueiredo versus Benavidez, number 2. So I can't wait for that. There is actually a lot of UFC going on lately, and I already have a premium play out to subscribers for this Wednesday night's fights.
You're fired.
Before I get into the Pac-12 here, I want to talk a little bit about how the Big Ten and Pac-12 first canceled their in-conference games. I do kind of understand why they did it. They don't want to be liable for anybody getting sick. Not that anyone's ever been sued because someone caught the flu before, but they're thinking that maybe this time it could happen. I don't know. I wish the government would come out and say you can be sued as a business or you can't for this epidemic, being that it's so different, or pandemic, I should say. I wish that would have happened, because now they might just cancel at the very last minute. You don't want that to happen. But at the same time, the economy's got to still keep rolling here, and non-conference games were canceled, and these are going to be a really big hit for some of these schools. I mean, Bowling Green relied on like $2.2 million just to play at Ohio State this year. That game itself pays more than the rest of their games put together for attendance. I mean, huge hit to them. It's almost like the Big Ten said, F you to the non-conference games and schools, because, now their accounting is completely messed up. Yet the Big Ten's still going to make some money, and these teams are still going to make some money via their TV contracts, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't understand that as much, especially because Bowling Green is so close. It's not like you're bringing in people from other parts of the country. 115 miles away is Bowling Green to Ohio State. So, it's practically in their backyard. So if you want to make the argument, the virus by geographic area, that doesn't make sense for most of these in-conference games. I know some of them is different. I know Michigan had to go to Washington. I know Oregon had to play Ohio State too. So there's a few of them. The least thing that they can do, in my opinion, is that they could share the wealth a little bit. Give Bowling Green some of that money because they were expecting it. And obviously the other small conference teams playing big teams like the SEC, the ACC, Pac-12, Big 12, Big 10, they can all share a little bit as well, because this is something that, they did to them by canceling it. Of course, we can all blame it down to the pandemic, but in my opinion, it doesn't make sense to do that, because I think if you're going to have any season by screwing over some other colleges just so your own conference can get through, if you have to go that far, then why even have a season in the first place? If it's that important to cancel non-conference games just so you can do it yourself, then this probably makes more sense just to cancel the whole season. Now, I don't want that, because I think the rates have went extremely low when it comes to death, and we're finding out all these people are asymptomatic out there. It's just my opinion. Yours can be different. I'm not going to argue with you. It doesn't matter. But why just do some if it's that bad to do some and not just do the whole thing? In my opinion, I think the whole season should be played, and people should be quarantined by age and underlying health conditions. Being that they made these changes, I have an idea that might spruce things up a little bit for us football fans anyway. These non-conference games are not going to happen for the most part. I'm pretty sure that other conferences like the Big 12, they haven't yet, but they're going to end up going that way. One domino falls, the rest of them falls. It's almost like a race for the first person to cancel these days. I think that bowl season should be kind of shot as well. So, in order to get a national champion this year, I think instead of having a bowl season, I think we should have a 24-team tournament. Okay? You already limited your games down to 9 from 12 anyway, right? You already did that. So less wear and tear on the student athletes. And you can start with 24 teams, the top 24, give the top 8 teams a bye week, and have a small NCAA football tournament to find out who the national champion would be. How awesome would that be? How many fans would be so excited that their team is in the playoffs to have a shot to win the national title? Absolutely. I absolutely think that idea should be looked at right now. And the fact that you're giving 8 teams a bye week that deserve it because they're the top 8 teams, the other ones just have to play that extra game. It's not like you're making these kids play a ton of extra games anyway. Say you're the 24th team and you happen to win. Then you play the first place team when there's 16 left. So that's 2 games you play. If you win that one, there's 8 teams left. That's 3 games you play to get to the Final Four. If you win that, that's 4 games you play to get to the final 2. And if you win that, there's 1 more game. 5 games plus 8 is 13, which is only 1 extra game to win the championship over what you play in a normal season anyway. Now, if you're in the top 8, there's only 4 extra games because you have that bye week. So that's just my idea. Thought it'd be kind of cool to finally see that in football, seeing that we're in a different year anyway. If you have any thoughts about that, please feel free to tweet us at the Odds Breakers. Without further ado, let's get into the Pac-12 Conference preview. Let's get started here with the Pac-12 Conference. So this conference has been looked at the worst of the Power Five for some time now. As a whole, I can't buy that because the ACC is really the worst of the Power Five. I mean, minus Clemson. Take out Clemson, the ACC is worse than the American Athletic Conference. They are probably also worse than the Mountain West Conference. I'm sorry. They are that bad. But the good news, they might be a little bit better this year because North Carolina is trending up and Virginia Tech is trending up. But that is going to be discussed on a different podcast because we are talking about the Pac-12 here. And I think that the Pac-12 actually has a legitimate shot in becoming the third best conference this year behind the Big Ten and the SEC. I really think that they have a shot. The ACC is still, like I said, bad besides Clemson, but the Big 12 has embarrassed the last few years in the playoffs. They've really embarrassed, and the Pac-12 has gotten stronger, in my opinion, and we'll get into that. In my power ratings, I have 2 teams on top of the Pac-12. I have 4 teams in the upper middle. They're kind of those guys, those upper middle class teams, that have nice cars, Mercedes, Audis, $750,000 house. They got a pool, maid service, etc. Upper middle class. Maybe a vacation home. We can throw in a vacation home. Teams like Utah, Washington, ASU, and Cal. Those 4 teams. And then there's a lot of questions for the bottom 6. So I think that the upside here is definitely with the top 2 teams and a couple of them in the next group of 4 there. So we're going to go over it. We're going to assume 9 games, and I'll give you my win total for those 9 games. And the top team that I have in the Pac-12 is different than most people because I have USC at number 1 when most people have Oregon. I have USC power rated at about 15 points, better than the average team. Their 2019 record was 8-5. They have no key transitions whatsoever, all returning. They have returning production ranking 5th in the nation, 77% of offensive production and 87% of defensive production via Bill Conley from ESPN's rankings. That's what I use for returning production percentage. Recruiting rankings in 2017 was 4th in the nation, 2018 was 4th in the nation, and 2019 was 19th in the nation. So the recruiting was great, but they started to fade a bit. But I think from what happened last year, that could possibly get back on track. They had a good year. Net yards per play was 0.82, which isn't bad at all. I expect it to be better, especially this year. Their turnover margin was -10. I mean, that's in the bottom 110 to 130. -10 turnovers. Horrible. But it's also good because that means there's a huge opportunity to improve on that. Their schedule is hard. They get from the north, Stanford, as always, Cal, Washington, and at Oregon. So they definitely have a hard schedule, which is tough. Their closing line against the spread was 6-6-1 and ATS margin of 0.3. And I'm going to bring that up to you. This is something new that I added to our previews. It's important that we're a sports betting website and podcast to go over this to show you the perception of these teams throughout the year. 6-6-1 is pretty average. That's 50% exactly right there. Plus 0.3, not much of an ATS margin. But I do like ATS margin a lot because it could be something to go to find value. Because if a team starts out 3-3 against the spread, but their ATS margin is like 4 points or 5 points above to the plus, that means they probably blew out a couple teams and lost some close games to a couple of teams, and that's why they look only 3-3 ATS, 3 for 3, not 3 out of 3, out of 6 games, 3 for 3. But that means you might want to bet them for their next game because they're capable of covering the spread because their ATS margin is larger, right? Maybe something happened at the end of those games where they let the other team back in or something, or a fumble or something like that. But ATS margin is definitely good to look at because it's just another data point that you can use and compare to what their actual closing line ATS was. So if it's 6-6-1, you think, the market's nailed this down. Yet if they're 5 points above in the ATS margin, you know that they're covering spreads by a good amount. Now, on the flip side of the coin, if they're negative 5 points, then you might want to fade that team for the next game because they might be getting lucky to close to be 3-3 against the spread or whatever you want to go by. So, in my point, ATS margin is something that we should start looking at more, and we can't really start looking at it until they play a few games in this season. But we're going by last year because we're going to see what the perception is on these teams. We don't have any season win total numbers, but at least we have some data from last year. So USC is my favorite team to win the Pac-12. They returned most of their production, 19 starters, ranking 5th in the nation. I really like the fact that they had those 2 top 4 recruiting classes in 2017 and 2018. All of that returning production and those top 4 recruiting classes tell me that this team should seriously progress for next year. Caden Slovis, great young quarterback, did a fantastic job last year. Offensive coordinator Graham Harrell probably saved Clay Helton's job. The biggest question is if their defense can step up this year. The schedule is pretty hard, but can USC be intimidated by anybody? Can they get intimidated by going to Oregon when they're USC? I mean, they're still USC. This team's minus 10 turnover margin last year, like I said, was a bad thing and a good thing. I think there's a great chance if they can get that sucker to 0 or positive, it's just more fuel to the fire for them to win 8 or 9 games possibly. They're better than their 8-5 record when your team's at minus 10 turnover margin. I mean, that's just how it goes. I expect a very good season. That comeback that they had versus Notre Dame last year in Notre Dame, that tells me that this offense is definitely capable of it. How well the defense change after giving up 29.4 points per game and 5.7 yards per play? That's my question. Todd Orlando was hired to take these high-powered recruits and make them gel together here. Now, my problem with Todd Orlando is that he was just at Texas with high recruits and completely sucked at his job as defensive coordinator. I mean, UFC hires the guy from Texas. Did you see Texas's defenses the last few years? Let me look this up. Todd Orlando was at Texas from 2017 to 2019 as a defensive coordinator / linebacker coach. I mean, he got fired from there. So I am seriously concerned about that. But here's something that you can hang your hat on. USC's defense didn't get a fair shake last year. Just because of all those turnovers. A lot of them were in the red zone. Defenses had a short field against the offenses. The offenses had an easier time getting better field position. Field position is so important in football. So I think the defense has a chance, even with Tartolano, to progress. And they also have a new special teams coach in Sean Snyder, who is the son of former Kansas State coach Bill Snyder. And he should clean up that kickoff team that gave up some TDs last year. And that kickoff team wasn't good. Another problem with field position. So if they fix those two things, I think USC has a legitimate shot to win this. And that's probably my favorite to play. If they're anywhere better than 3.5-ish to 1, then I would take them to win the Pac-12. Looking at their schedule, like I said, it's pretty hard, and they have to go to Oregon. I have USC at 7.5 wins this year. So anything over 6.5, it's a shortened season, obviously. 6.5 is my number. I used to have a 1.5 game variance. Now it's just going to be 1. If it's 7, I won't play it. But if it's at 6.5, I will take USC over. And we'll see where those lines come out when they do. For the next team, you can imagine, it is the Oregon Ducks. And power rating I have on them is 13.5. Not too far from USC. You know, a 1.5 difference. Now, you have to understand that these are just beginning power ratings. Things can change, obviously, in the season. But they were 12-2 last year. Key transitions, Justin Herbert to the NFL. Offensive coordinator Marcus Arroyo left to UNLV. And Joe Moorhead from Mississippi State was fired and came to Oregon to be the new OC there. So there you go. We have some serious changes over there. We have a coordinator, and especially with the quarterback. Returning production ranks 89th. Offense, 34%. Defense, higher at 81%. Top 20 overall recruiting classes is nice in the last 3 years. 2017 was 19th, 2018 was 13th, and 2019 was 7th. Net yards per play, positive 1.61. Very, very nice, obviously. Turnover margin, plus 16. That's in the top 10 there. Amazing. But I think some regression has to be imminent with the new quarterback. Schedule, medium easy. They get Arizona, ASU, Colorado, and USC at home from the South. Obviously, they still have to play their Cals, their Washingtons, their Washington States, right? What else is nice is that Stanford hasn't been all that great since the last couple years. Last year was a terrible year for Stanford, and we will get to them. 2019 closing line against the spread was 8-6, and 2019 ATS margin was plus 5.4. Really nice ATS positive margin there. Now, not too long ago, obviously they beat my Badgers in the Rose Bowl, but they were outgained by 100 yards and had a 4-1 turnover margin. Only 1 turnover for Oregon and 4 for Wisconsin. That helped them win by 1 point for sure. All right. Yes, I'm bitter. This team, though, is at least guaranteed a fantastic defense for 2020. They return some serious studs that I watched play the Badgers. This defense should be rock solid this year. Oregon returns 81% production a couple stud linebackers. They actually have 2 5-star linebackers laying back in the cut in Noah Sewell and Justin Flo from the 2020 class. They could see some time this year. Okay, they have some depth. The question to me is the obvious. Will Tyler Shaw, their new quarterback, be a decent replacement for Justin Herbert? If not, Oregon does have a backup plan. They have Boston College graduate transfer Anthony Brown. He's very experienced. See him play for years there. But I'm also concerned that this team only returns 1 starting offensive lineman from last year's team. I'm big about the trenches, if you know me, if you listen to this podcast the last few years. The fact that they're going to have a new offensive coordinator in Joe Moorhead also tells me that there's a larger variance of outcomes that can happen this year. I mean, the best news for this team for 2020 is they get USC, ASU, Stanford, and Washington all at home. So their toughest battle might just be at Cal. I can definitely see 8 wins here, but it won't be worth it from a futures perspective because they're going to be the favorite. Their ATS margin of plus 5.4 tells me that I probably don't want to fade them coming into this year, but I'll tell you this. I am going to pound some unders when this season gets a-rolling. Out of the 9 games, I count 8 wins. And my guess is that you're going to see a season win total of probably around 7.5 when it all comes out. Not enough value for that. The next team might be a little bit of a shocker, but there's been a lot of change with a lot of teams, and that's why the California Bears are power rated at 8.5 and the 3rd best team in the Pac-12. 2019 record was 8-5. Key transitions, nunzo. Returning production, 9th in the nation. Offense, 93%. Defense, 50%. Recruiting, not good. I mean, they haven't been recruiting great, but it's gotten down to the 40s at least. In 2017, it was 70th. 2018 was 42nd, and 2019 was 43rd. So they have some work to do there, but 2019 net yards per play, minus 0.29. That wasn't great either, but their quarterback was injured. Chase Garbers was out for 4 or 5 games, and that's a big portion of that. Turnover margin, plus 3. Schedule this year is hard, but it's kind of fortunately hard. And I'll explain that later. They get USC, ASU, UCLA, and Utah from the South. So the whole USC, ASU, and Utah scare me the most. Closing line ATS, 7-6 last year. ATS margin just plus 0.8, so around average. So the Cal Bears return, like I said, most of their offensive production, 93%. Their only losses were a few receivers to the draft, but Chase Garber's top target and Nico Remigio is back. All right? He is back. So you are probably asking yourself, why the hell does Kiev have Cal, his 3rd favorite team, when they are negative 0.29 in yards? Well, just like I said before, their quarterback was injured. Devin Modster took over for those games and went 5 for 5 TD to interception ratio and was only 50% complete with his passes. That's pretty bad for a college quarterback. Now, Cal certainly did lose their top tacklers in Evan Weaver. He was a stud, all Pac-12, and Ashton Davis. But I'm not that worried about their defense because Justin Wilcox is a defensive coach. I've seen him do it at the Badgers. He was a linebacker himself when he played in the pros for the Niners. I am very confident that he's going to take care of this defense no matter what, because they do only return 50% of their guys, but he's a defensive-minded coach, so I like that. I like that their offense is coming in with experience, and they have a great coach on the defense. He's the main reason that I have so much upside for Cal here. Now, Cal's brutal schedule is having to play, like I said, USC, ASU, UCLA from the South, but at least they get USC, Utah, Stanford, Oregon, and Washington all at home this year. Okay? Having Oregon, Washington, and USC at home is huge. Throw in Stanford and Utah. So their easier games are at least on the road. That's some good news for them. Now, I think if they win their home games, especially the Oregon game, you might get a little bit of value with this team, right? You might get some value. So their future was 20-1 to win the Pac-12. It wasn't the greatest future. I expected it to be better, but I did take them at 20-1. The futures are gone right now, but if that thing comes out 15-1, 20-1, which means plus 2,000 or better, I still really like this play as a sleeper because I really like Cal this year. Oregon's got some variance, like I said earlier. You know, they have that new quarterback, new offensive coordinator, and only returned a little bit of production. So as far as the win total, I only have Cal at 6.5 wins. All right? And that's because of their schedule being so hard. But if they win a couple key games, if they beat Oregon and beat Washington and beat Stanford, they're going to have a great shot to win the Pac-12 North and go play USC from the Pac-12 South. So if you have a little bit on both teams for your future to win the Pac-12, well, there you all go.
Winning.
For number 4, the next team we have is the Utah Utes. Power rating is 8.5. And I got to tell you, I had to bring them all the way down from 17.25 last year to 8.5 this year. The 2019 record is 11-3. Key transitions, a ton of them. Running back Zach Moss to the NFL. Quarterback Tyler Huntley to the NFL. Tackle Darren Paulo to the NFL. And a shit ton of defense to the NFL. 2019 returning production ranks dead last in all of football at 130, 48% on the offense, 27% on the defense. That's brutal. That's a tough hurdle for Whittingham to get over. Recruiting, in the low 30s to 40s. It was 2017 was 33rd, 2018 was 33rd, 2019 was 42nd. Net yards per play last year, plus 1.95. Fantastic. More or less amazing, right? Best Utah team I've ever seen. Turnover margin plus 9 as well was very good. Their schedule this year, at least, is medium easy. They avoid Oregon. They get Washington at home, and they have to go to Cal, and they get to host Oregon State from the Pac-12 North. 2019 closing line ATS 9-5. If you bet on them, you were doing pretty damn well. 2019 ATS margin plus 1.9. So last year's Utes team, like I said, was the best that I can ever remember, going 11-3. No easy feat. I can excuse that bowl loss against Texas. You know, they faltered at the end when they lost to Oregon. Probably lost all motivation when their hopes and dreams were crushed of making the playoffs. All they had to do was win that game. And they would have, that game against Oregon, and they would have been in the football playoffs, and Oklahoma would have been the 5th team out. So remember that. Big hit, and that's why their performance was so bad. But their key losses are just so big here. Huntley was awesome. Zach Moss was awesome. Lots of kids to graduations. A record 7 players got drafted. That's pretty awesome. So the biggest problem is no recruiting class really ranked over 33rd here, right? So you can't really expect it to be all put together like a reload team for this year. So their 1.95 net yards per play was fantastic. And I don't expect it to necessarily go in the negatives or something, but I just expect them to go from great, not elite, they were great last year, to medium good. Kind of like the upper middle class example that I talked about earlier. So their schedule, I really like it. Very manageable, avoiding Oregon, getting USC and Washington at home. Kyle Whittingham always seems to overachieve expectations. So that's why I don't want to exactly jump in completely fading them. But I do have them at 6.5 wins. Probably with some downside. I wouldn't say with some upside. I would say with some downside. So definitely not going to be using them in any future plays whatsoever. And for my next team at number 5.
This is what's great about sports. This is what the greatest thing about sports is. You play to win the game. Hello? You play to win the game. You don't play to just play it. That's the great thing about sports. You play to win. And I don't care if you don't have any wins. You go play to win. When you start telling me it doesn't matter, then retire. Get out. Because it matters.
Hermes ASU Sun Devils. Power rating is 8 points better than the average team. 2019 record 8-5. Key transitions. Marvin Lewis and Antonio Pierce replace Anthony Gonzalez as co-defensive coordinators. Returning production, 72nd in the league, 50% on offense, 76% on defense. Recruiting was 30s, but now dipping into the 20s. So that's doing a little bit better under Herm. Recruiting rankings, 2017 was 32nd, 2018 was 36th, and 2019 was 28th. 2019 net yards per play, 0.23, not too bad, positive there. Turnover margin, plus 14. Amazing job. 6th in the nation at plus 14. So that's all Herm Edwards right there in his coaching. Schedule, hard, very hard. Getting Cal, Oregon, Oregon State, and Washington State up north. That's going to be kind of brutal, especially the Cal and Oregon part. So just not too excited about their schedule. 2019 closing ATS 5-7-1, so a little bit under expectations. Just plus 0.1 for ATS margin. So maybe a little bad luck there. ASU was always hard to bet for me. They play Sacramento State and only win by 12 points. Freaking Sacramento State. And then they go and beat Michigan State. This is when people were high on Michigan State. So ASU once again impressed. They won their bowl game against Florida State. Herm Edwards has been trending up in recruiting, and he's shown that he's got a knack for coaching college kids. I think he's better at college than he was in the pros. And the things that I see consistent is their quarterback, Jaden Daniels. He is kind of an A personality. He reaches out to kids, helps the recruiting. I'm loving that about him. Huge leader on this team. And he really learned not to turn the ball over, and that's why they're so good at plus 14 there for their turnover ratio. So, they did lose some serious players, though. Brandon Ayuk and Eno Benjamin to the draft. You got to factor that in, but they seem to be manufacturing some receivers there every single year. I like the fact that they get some graduate transfers from Stanford and Texas A&M to replace the 2 tackles who graduated. Returning production on defense is very solid, 76%. And they're also experienced in helping to create some of those turnovers that they did to get to that plus 14 ratio. So I'm not seeing a lot of regression from that. When I see the same quarterback here, the same coach, and much of the same defense, I expect them to repeat a positive turnover ratio. So we'll see, though, about Marvin Lewis and Antonio Pierce, because I did not like Marvin Lewis in the NFL, but maybe this is his place for him, especially under Hermie. And they got to improve to the next level, I think, for yards per play. They got to get under 5 yards per play on defense. And I think 6 wins is very attainable for this team, even though they have a very hard schedule here. So they should lose at USC and Oregon. But as long as they take care of business at home and sacrifice maybe one more hiccup, I think they're going to win 6 games. Not sure where that number is going to come up. It's probably going to be, out of 9 games, it's probably going to be around 5, 5.5. But if that sucker is 5, I would seriously think about betting the over. And if it was 4.5, I would play it for sure. For number 6, we have the Washington Huskies, also power rated at 8. 2019 record was 8-5. Key transitions. Drum roll, please. Chris Peterson left the team. And now Jimmy Lake, the former defensive coordinator, will take over. Returning production is only 104th in the nation. Offense is 30%. Defense is 74%. Recruiting rankings, 2017 was 22nd. 2018 was 16th. And 2019 was 15th. Very solid top 20 recruiting there. So got to be happy about that, at least as a Washington Husky fan. Net yards per play, 0.72. So that's pretty huge. Turnover margin, +8. That's very good. Schedule, very hard. This team gets to play USC, of course. I feel like everybody's playing USC. They have to go to Oregon, and they also get Utah and Colorado and Arizona from the South. So there you go. Pretty tough schedule. 2019 closing line against the spread was 8-5. 2019 against the spread margin was +2.9. So they were a good team to bet on last year, apparently. Washington really lost who some experts consider a top 5 coach in Chris Peterson. To add fuel to the fire, they also lost their quarterback to the NFL in Jacob Eason. So 8 starting offensive players total are gone from last year's team. New offensive coordinator John Donovan will have his hands full for sure. New quarterback Jacob Simon only had a few passing attempts last year, and it's probably going to come out a little bit green. The only good news for this team is that they do return 7 starters on defense, and they're going to have to be the heart and soul of this team. So lastly, their schedule is downright brutal, having to play USC, Utah, and Arizona, and Colorado from the South. They have to go to Oregon, Cal, USC, and to Utah this year too. So their away games are pretty brutal there. I just can't see this team getting a lot of wins here, and I only have them at 4.5 wins, even though I have them power rated 8. I think it's kind of a generous 8, but if you see where I had them last year, the Washington Huskies were at 10.5, and I downgraded them 2.5 points. Probably could have went a little bit lower, but the recruiting classes being in the top 20 is kind of what kept me in that threshold. It's not like I'm going to go there firing on Washington, and I'll probably settle on a number after a game or two, but I just put that there to be a little bit more cautious. I think it's 8 from my calculations of the returning production and yards per play and everything else that I put into it. Team number 7, UCLA, power rating is 5. 2019 record is 4-8. Key transitions, none. So, none for UCLA. I don't know if that's good or bad. Returning production, 67th. Offense was 75% and defense was 53%. Recruiting rankings, 2017 was 20th, 2018 was 19th, 2019 was 40th. Recruiting was in the top 20, but lots of players not going towards Chip Kelly this year. Net yards per play, a minus 1.5, which is absolutely brutal. Shame for that. I mean, a UCLA team, minus 1.5 net yards per play. I bet 10 years ago you never would have thought it would get this bad for this team. You know, never would have thought it. Let me minus it right now. No, it's 1.4, whatever. 1.4 yards per play. Terrible. Okay. Turnover margin, minus 8. Couldn't even get a bone there. Their schedule this year, easy. They get a bone there. Oregon State, Washington State, and Cal. Those are the 4 teams that they get from the north. So, you know, Cal's a little bit tough, but I'll take Washington in a rebuild year. I'll take Washington State on a super rebuild year, and Oregon State as well. 2019 closing line against the spread was 4-7-1. If you bet on this team, you lost. You know, who was betting on UCLA anyway towards the end of the year? ATS margin was minus 2.3. I remember when Chip Kelly was the king of the Pac-12 years back at Oregon. His claim to fame was the hurry-up spread offense that caught many teams by surprise. But since those days, he hasn't been as successful. And now he's entering his 3rd year at UCLA. It's put up or shut up. I'm a Chip Kelly fan, so I have to give him the benefit of the doubt. But I can guarantee you that some boosters for UCLA are going to be quite anxious by now. Okay? Kelly just lost 7 games in 4 seasons at Oregon. 7 games. That's it. All right? That's not much. You know, I'm concerned that Kelly didn't fire defensive coordinator Jerry Azzinaro after allowing 6.7 yards per play. You know, 6.7. Oh, man, UCLA. 4 wins last year. On offense, at least they have Dorian Thomas-Robinson returning. That's not a bad thing. He actually was at 59.7% completion percentage and 21-12 TD interception ratio. That's pretty good. But he needs to keep moving forward if this team's going to be competitive. I upgraded them slightly in my power ranks by a couple points because their recruiting, at least 2 years, was really good of those 3. But if Chip Kelly doesn't put it together this year, he's going to find himself on the hot seat, and he might even lose his job. They need to get 4 wins here. My wins for UCLA, at least they have that easy schedule, is 4.5. Next team, number 8, the Stanford Cardinal. Power rating is at 4.5. The returning production for Stanford, 28th in the league, 71% on offense, 74% on defense. Record was 4-8 last year. No key transitions. Recruiting, 2017 was 14th, 2018 was 40th, and 2019 was 20th. A little over the board there. Not too bad, really, if you look at it as a whole, except 2018 was that hiccup. But as I explained before, that happens, especially with kids needing scholarships. Net yards per play, a minus 0.71. Pretty bad. Turnover margin, minus 1. That for a Stanford team, yeesh. Schedule's medium. They get USC, Arizona, Colorado, and UCLA from the South. Arizona and Colorado is nice. UCLA is not bad. They at least get the Ducks and the Trojans at home this year. So they're, the Ducks are tough, but the Trojans are as well, but they get to host those games. Their 2019 closing line ATS was only 3-9. Their 2019 ATS margin was minus 0.42. Not good for a Stanford team. David Shaw has really been on a downward trend over the past years. This Stanford team had a terrible season, and they did not qualify for a bowl game. Their net yards per play was brutal, like I said. Very uncharacteristic. Very uncharacteristic to have their turnover margin in the negatives as well. What happened to Stanford? Ranking 11th in rushing, 11th at only 3.7 yards per carry. Oh, an epic failure. The somewhat good news is that they return over 70% production on both sides of the ball, and they do have consistency at coach and quarterback. David Mills is back at the helm with some experience because KJ Costello transferred out to Mississippi State. Stanford's defense wasn't so great last year, especially like it was during Harbaugh's era or anything. They gave up 30 points per game, 6.3 yards per play, but what I will say is this is going to be what they need to rely on for next year. If the defense can hold up, they can win some games. Being that this team was still decent at recruiting, I have to give them the benefit of the doubt a little bit. My power ratings, and I actually did upgrade them 4 points last year because they were awful in the negatives last year, or close. It was around 0 actually, or 4.5, never mind. But very reluctant to bet on them, especially because of their 3-9 ATS from last year. I'm losing a little faith in Shaw myself, but I do have 6 wins, I guess, with some upside because their schedule happens to be pretty favorable. The next team, we have Oregon State, power rated at 3 points better than the average team. 2019 record was 5-7. Key transitions, Jake Luton to the NFL, returning production at 84th in the nation, 35% on offense, 82% on defense. Recruiting rankings, 2017 was 51st, 2018 was 70th, 2019 was 52nd. Nothing to write home about there for sure. Net yards per play, minus 0.1, which is actually a big improvement for this Oregon State team. Huge improvement from what they were. Turnover margin was plus 10, which was amazing. Their schedule this year is easy. From the South, they get Arizona, UCLA, Utah, and ASU. They get to avoid USC. 2019 closing line ATS, 9-3. That is the best in the Pac-12 from a betting standpoint. Their ATS margin was plus 5.6. They were undervalued all freaking year. That is something we have to remember when they start playing next year. Whew. And when I say, whew, this team has really exceeded their expectations here. Just like I was saying, that 9-3 blows my mind. When I look at what Jonathan Smith, their coach, inherited from Gary Anderson and what he did, I'm thoroughly impressed. Thoroughly impressed. Gary Anderson destroyed that team. This team was almost dead even in net yards per play. An Oregon State team, dead even. That's pretty good for what they've been over the last 10 to 15 years. They almost made a bowl game. Oh, so close. They had that 1-point loss at Washington State in that huge shootout, 54-53. And I still remember sitting in my bed watching that game. I think I bet on, God, who did I bet? I bet the over. I bet the over, and I hit that a long time ago. And I was happy about it, but the damn game was so good that I just had to keep watching. It was pretty late at night by then. So the biggest thing for me is Jake Luton, right? He's leaving. He was a huge leader in this team, and he's in the NFL right now, and he deserves to be. I think he only threw 2 interceptions and had like 27 touchdowns. But they at least have some upside here. If the Beavers are going to remain successful, new starting quarterback and Nebraska transfer Tristan Gebbia will capitalize on this role. Well, he needs to capitalize on this role. If he can play close, even just close to what Jake Luton did for this team, I'm going to be pretty confident. The offensive return in production at only 35% is a little misleading because of just how big Jake Luton was last year. They do return 6 starters. Okay? So that's something there. They returned 6 starters. Their defense looks like they should take a step forward in returning 8 starters. And you saw how well they performed against teams like UCLA, Cal, and ASU last year. They performed very well. They performed pretty good against Oregon, too, for a huge part of that game towards the end of the year. Only 24 points they allowed to Oregon. So I got to tell you, I think I might have to start betting this team almost blindly right from the get-go of this season. And if you want a super sleeper, and I mean super sleeper here for the Pac-12, you can maybe even bet them for just the North if you want, if you can find the line, if it comes out. Play football this year. I would think it might be Oregon State. And you know why? It's because they host Oregon at home this year. That's the key. This team is going to be very sneaky. Even though my power rating is only a 3, and I can't go higher than 3 just because they lost Luton, and I don't know what this quarterback's going to look like, and their recruiting hasn't been high, right? I mean, the recruiting class, like I said, 51st, 70th, and 52nd. Possibly the worst aggregated 3 years in the whole Pac-12. Arizona might be right there too. But either way, I see some upside with this team if their quarterback could be pretty good. Number 10, the Washington State Cougars, power rating 2.75, just slightly under Oregon State. 2019 record was 6-7. Key transitions, another big one. Mike Leach to Mississippi State and quarterback Anthony Gordon to the NFL. Returning production, only 85th, 36% on offense, 80% on defense. Recruiting rankings, 2017 was 44, 2018 was 47, 2019 was 66. Recruiting was going backwards. Maybe that's why Mike Leach left. I mean, kind of left them high and dry, I guess. But, I mean, net yards per play was plus 0.5. That's not bad, a half yard, typical Leach. Turnover margin, -6. Also typical Mike Leach, you know, with his air raid, consistently pass offense, pass first offense. Schedule easy this year, so that's good. They avoid USC and Utah from the south, and they get Oregon at home this year. So that's pretty good. 2019 closing line ATS was only 4-9. ATS margin was -2.8. A lot of changes this year for the Cougars. The elephant in the room is obviously Mike Leach leaving to go and coach Mississippi State. But let's face it, if the Cougars were never going to compete with Oregon in recruiting, they don't have a booster like Uncle Phil and Nike supporting that team. You know, if anything, Nike's going to try to keep that team down. Don't want to go against those dollars. At least in the SEC, at Mississippi State, Leach can land him some top 20 classes there. Anyways, I do like the new hire, though, of Nick Rolovich from Hawaii. I think it's kind of a perfect plug-in fit. You know, he has got the very similar style that Leach has in the high-powered air raid attack that's worked so well for this team in Mike Leach's tenure. Washington State was an amazing 7.1 yards, 7.14 yards per play last season. I mean, that's like almost Oklahoma level, right? 7.14 yards per play. And the one year that they did have a defense in 2018, they were a much bigger contender, and they were so close to making a playoff push if they didn't lose during the rain. That's the problem with this team. Whenever it rained, it always would throw off their passing attack, and it was a huge downfall for this team. But the big issue that I have is that there's just a ton of transition here. Losing Gordon to the NFL, Leach, obviously, you can't bet on this team from the get-go. Without time to put things together, it's going to make it even harder. With the virus here and everything, there's probably hasn't been a lot of practicing going on. The defense last year was pretty pathetic, allowing 31 points per game and 6.6 yards per play. This really sums it up to me. To me, the Cougars will once again be similar to the actual female cougar that you see at night from time to time, prowling around at the bars looking for their next victim. They're both attractive, super aggressive, all offense and no defense whatsoever, and very regretful the very next morning. Second to last, we have the Colorado Buffaloes power rating minus 3.75. That's kind of a big jump there, like a 5-6 point jump. And I was kind of looking for ways to make them look better. They were 5-7 last year. Mel Tucker, key transition, leaves them after 1 year of coaching to go to Michigan State. Brutal. I mean, just said all the right things when he got there, acted like he was going to be there forever, told the kids that when he recruited them, and off he just goes to Michigan State. And to make matters worse, quarterback Steven Montez and wide receiver Laviska Shenault went to the NFL. Returning production 115th, offense was 36%, defense 62%, recruiting rankings 2017 was 35th, 2018 was 53rd, 2019 was 44th. Recruiting was kind of average in the 40s, right? Yeah. I mean, not terrible, but not great. Net yards per play -1. That's pretty bad. Turnover margin +3. That's okay. Their schedule this year is medium hard. They get Oregon, Stanford, Washington, and Washington State from the north. So, yeah, medium hard for sure, leaning towards the hard. Closing line, ATS last year, 6.6, and ATS margin -0.5. Pretty medium there, pretty average for what they did. They did shock a few teams last year, I remember. I still don't know how this team beat Nebraska last year and came back that game, but it didn't really help them much because it screwed Nebraska over because they just missed a bowl game by a game, and Colorado missed a bowl game anyway. I kind of feel bad for the Buffaloes hiring Mel Tucker, and then very next year he bails out for Michigan State. I suppose the silver lining here is that Mel Tucker, in my opinion, was a very bad hire in the first place. I think I talked about that last year. I've seen him with the Bears, the Chicago Bears, that is, as a defense coordinator. Not good. The fact that this organization is going to have 3 different coaches in 3 years is kind of what has me worried. It's bad for the kids. And what makes matters worse is that their 2 best players in Montez and Laviska Shenault went to the NFL. And Laviska Shenault was an absolute beast. All right. I mean, if there's a receiver, a later pick receiver, I think he was like 3rd round in the NFL, it's Laviska Shenault. The good news is that we can lean on that they were a +3 in turnover margin, and I think that's the only good years. They were kind of disciplined last year, but you hope that this is going to carry forward with some new places, that discipline that they at least had. New coach Carl Durrell is going to take over, okay? And he's been bouncing all over the country since 1989. I looked at his history. I remember him. He was at UCLA from 2003 to 2007. Then he kind of went to the NFL. This man probably hasn't bought a home since the 80s, if he has ever, because every 2 years he's literally in a different city. Kind of like a drifter in a way. But, it's kind of sad, though, in a way, that because you want a coach to eventually become settled and really land a good job. Hopefully his tenure at UCLA from 2003 to 2007 did him something here, but this is his second shot in life here. And, let's hope that eventually he can turn this team around. But the team on defense at least returns 8 starters, but these are the same 8 starters that gave up 32 points per game last year. That's not good. Let's see if they compete with Arizona here to be the worst team in the Pac-12 for 2020. So there you have it. I have them at 1.5 wins. And I just can't find any more. I cannot find any more wins than that. So 1.5 is the best I can do. I might have missed this part in Washington State. I only had Washington State at 2 wins. But we'll see where these win totals come out. These teams are not playing their non-conference, so they're not going to get that opportunity for those easy wins here. You got to remember that, especially when you're betting into them this year. Number 12 is Arizona, power rating minus 4.5. 2019 record was 4-8. Key transitions, new defensive coordinator Paul Rhodes. Returning production was 30th. That's actually all right. 66% in offense, 79% in defense. Recruiting rankings, 2017 was 45th. 2018 was 61st. 2019 was 56th. That's just how they recruit, like a bad Power 5 school. They're competing with ASU, and, the California colleges can't be easy right there. So net yards per play minus 0.31. Turnover margin minus 3. Schedule this year is medium hard. They get Oregon, Washington State, and Stanford from the north. 2019 closing line ATS was 3-8-1. 2019 ATS margin was minus 5.5. So if you bet on Arizona, your ass went broke. Summary. I feel like that we were lied to a little bit when Arizona won 4 games in a row. Because that's what they did. They went to Hawaii, and it was kind of a shootout, and they lost at the end. And Hawaii was a good team last year. And after they rolled through 4 games in a row, right? And a few of those were Pac-12 games too. I think there was like a Colorado or something in there. Right after that, they rattled off 7 losses in a row. Just boom, 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 done. Worst ATS in the Pac-12 at 3-8-1. I think that Kevin Sumlin is on borrowed time right now. And the excuses are not going to be able to last forever. He's had some pretty stupid tweets as well, insulting other teams like Texas A&M, which I thought was like, how the hell are you insulting the team that fired you when you can't even do anything in Arizona? But anyway, I just don't see this guy lasting. They're at least somewhat competitive, their last game versus Arizona State. So, at least they did that. The team really needs to replace some people at wide receiver. Their loss of J.J. Taylor, running back to the NFL. He was actually undrafted, so the kid went early. It's like he just wanted to get the hell out of there, apparently. New England picked him up, actually. So their defense, horrible. 120th out of 130 teams. That's where they ranked. And new defensive coordinator, Paul Rhodes. He coached Iowa State for 6 years, if you remember. He's going to try to turn it around, but I think they're just on borrowed time right now. Arizona's got a ton of work to do if they want to get out of the bottom of the barrel in the Pac-12. So my wins here are 1.5 as well. So there you have it. There's my Pac-12 preview. Hopefully we get some football this year, but what we do have for sure is some UFC. So let's get on Cub Fan Danny to take a look at Saturday's fights. All right, and now it is time to get into a sport that many of us have learned to love over the years. It is growing by leaps and bounds. We're going to talk a little UFC, and we got our guy, Cub Fan Danny, back to break down this weekend's matchups here. We have UFC Fight Night 173 and Cub Fan Danny. You can find him on Twitter at Cub Fan Danny. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, buddy. It's been crazy times, right? We were about to get together, and boom, everything exploded again.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, it's kind of an up and down thing here with whether you feel safe or not. But, at least we have some sports to watch, and you did.
At least we know this is the only sport that's really going to be on week in and week out, right? Baseball's coming up hopefully next week, right? We got football coming up in a few more weeks, and who knows if college football is going to be here. But the one thing we do know is UFC is here, and I think this is going to be a fun weekend, right, of fights.
Yep.
And I think that there's some value in a lot of these fights, so it's going to be good.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm very excited for these fights. I know it's not like a pay-per-view event like we had last week. And by the way, thank you for handicapping that with me last week, because we went 5-1, and that was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Huge week for Oddsbreakers members. So really excited about this event coming up, and very thankful that you and I got together to get this done. But maybe we can bring some more value here. Danny, huge decision last week. Volkanovski versus Max Holloway. Dana White didn't like it. I had the score Max Holloway winning at least like 48-47. Some people say 49-46, my man. What are your thoughts on what happened there?
Yeah, listen, I this is one of the things that drives me crazy about the fight game, right? And this is not UFC's fault. This is not Bellator's fault. This is not really anybody who does these fights and puts these promotions on. It's not their fault. The fault lies on who's ever putting the refereeing on these fights. Look, Max Holloway won 3 rounds to 2. He won the first 3 rounds, coasted the last 2, but he definitely won those first 3 rounds. Everybody said he won those first 3 rounds. What are they looking at, right? So, Kiev, this is what drives me crazy about this sport. I hate when somebody says that this person is the champ, you got to beat the champ. And I always say, what does that mean? Well, you got to knock them out, you got to submit them, or you got to completely dominate them for 5 rounds. I don't believe that. When you're a champ, it doesn't matter. If you lose a round, you lose a round. It should go round by round by round. Max Holloway won that fight. If you bet on Max Holloway, I'm sorry. I am sorry. Mm-hmm. But you lost, but you really, at the end of the day, you know in your heart you won, but that doesn't pay your bills, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why it's always so scary for me to always bet on a fighter that goes the distance, unless it's somebody like Usman, where all he does is put you up against the rope, the cage, and then dominate the fight that way, right? And they have to score the guy the victory. The point is, I can't stand the refereeing. They take a guy, they put him down there. Look, they put somebody like my wife to do these fights. She doesn't know anything. She knows more, but she knows more than these guys.
Yeah,
right?
it's because it's sanctioned, like you mentioned earlier, and hopefully that people are starting to realize how BS it is. That Usman fight, that should have been broken up many of those times when he had him pinned against the cage.
That was the worst. Listen, guys. I'll never. If I ever tell you to bet on Usman or bet against him, just don't even do it. I'll never watch that guy's fight again. I'll never buy his pay-per-view again. I think he's the most boring champion that we've ever had. He reminds me of GSP all over again, but much more boring. So I'm done with Usman, and I'm done with talking about him. But the refereeing, we got to get that fixed, and it's very difficult. And especially for people that like us who like to bet these fights, right? And you could have had a nice big payoff if you took Holloway. Right? Because he was a big dog in this one. You could have had a nice payout, which you deserved to take home.
Yep.
And you couldn't because somebody doesn't know what they're doing.
Otherwise, though, the card was amazing. The fights were awesome.
Fun.
Started out with a huge knockout. Some just great bouts that happened there. And
Yeah.
it's just a couple bad things. We're ranting about it because we had to address it here. But
Yes.
most importantly, the event was awesome. It was well worth the purchase too. So that was a lot of fun there. Well, we have a card coming up this weekend, and it should be available to people on ESPN Plus. And it's not like this card's going to blow you away. It's not a pay-per-view event. But me and you dug a little bit, and I don't know what fights you're going to pick. This is one of those situations where I didn't get together with Danny because we are doing a podcast. We don't like to do that because we want to talk things through, possibly have some disagreement if that happens, and hopefully find some value. So Danny picked a few fights to look at, and I picked a few fights to look at here. And we have a championship bout, a featherweight championship bout. So that's actually pretty cool for an event here.
That's fun, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Whenever there's a champion, right? So, look, I think the UFC is in a tough spot, right, Kiev? And I think we mentioned this before in other podcasts, but they're in a tough spot because they can't bring fighters over from certain countries, and because of flying and because of travel, they can't do it. So there's a lot of new names, right, that are coming up and going to be fighting. And I can't tell you, right, confidently who Davi Ramos is. I can't tell you that. It's not fair, right? Or Sergey Spivak. I don't know who that is. So what when we look at these fights, we have to be able to go back, look, see history, where they've been, how they've done, how they performed in big moments. That's what we were really looking at. At least I was looking at for these fights, right? And I'm sure you probably did the same thing. But it's going to be a lot of fun because a lot of these guys coming in there, they do want to make a good impression. So they're going to bomb and they're going to throw, and it should be fun.
Absolutely, my man. Well, why don't you go ahead and start and let us know, pick one of the fights you want to talk about. We'll save the main event for last because I'm sure we both broke that down a little bit. So why don't you throw one out there?
All right, so we could do this, right? This one's look, it's going to be a little bit of a boring play for me, but Hermanson and Gastelum, it should be a good fight, right? So really what the odd makers are saying is this one's even, right? They're both at minus 110. I've seen Gastelum go down a little bit, minus 115. But really the money's been even on both of these. And Kelvin's such a good fighter. Man, you look at Kelvin, he's been around for so long. He was a guy that was in the tough TV show. He was picked last, but he came out and he won that entire show, and there were some really good fighters on there. So the kid, he's so young, he's only 28 years old, and he's been in the organization for like 7 years now, right? Mm-hmm. So the thing about Calvin with me, right? I keep saying Calvin, but it's Kelvin. He is too big, too chubby for 175, right? But again, he's too small for 185. So he can come up against these guys where he's fighting now, 185, because the 175 was too much of a weight cut for him, right? The kid he's got big hands, right? He can wrestle. He's solid. He's just one of those guys that is solid. If that was your own kid, you would look at him and say, I'm really proud of what he does. But at the same time, he goes out there and sometimes he can't win a fight. It's the most mind-boggling thing I've ever seen with Kelvin, right? And I like Jack. I like Jack a lot, right? Hermanson. His last fight he lost against Cannonier. And Cannonier's got some bombs, right? But he got clipped. And things happen. It's MMA. But a little bit of a juice at minus 110, I think that's a play for me. It's not that bad, right? So it's a pick 'em here. You don't know what Kelvin's going to show up. Right? I think, he's coming off 2 losses in a row. He's fought big guys. He's fought all the big guys. He's fought for titles. He's beat the big guys. But you don't know where he's coming from. That's what scares me about Kelvin, right? Going across the world to fight, right? Meantime, he's, we're looking at Jack here. Jack's got some big wins, right? Sousa, he submitted David Branch, right, who's a black belt under Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. Nobody has that. Nobody sees that. He's, with the guillotine. So the guy can fight. So he came off a bad loss, right, which I think that he had some pressure fighting in his own country of Denmark, right? Mm-hmm. I think that put a lot of pressure on him. So even at a minus 110, I think that's a good play. You probably can still even get and I think this fight's going to end right before the 3 rounds are up. I think it's going to end early. You could, if you're gambling and you want to put some money down, you could certainly get some extra value on Hermanson winning inside the distance at plus 350. Okay, which I think could certainly happen. Although Kelvin is super tough, really super tough, but there's definitely some value there for me. I'm going to go a little bit softer on this one, and I'm going to take that minus 110 and run with the victory here for Hermanson.
I love it, and you had some great points, and this was one of the ones that I circled as well. I mean, you look at Hermanson, Jack the Joker Hermanson, 16 wins by KO or TKO. He is 20-4. He's not that old. He's 32 years old. He's got a few years on Kelvin. But if you look at it, he likes to finish people pretty quick. His average fight time is only 6 minutes and 18 seconds,
Yeah.
So he blows through some of these fights. Yeah, he did have that hiccup back in 2019. And to Jared, I believe.
Cannonier.
Cannonier, yep.
Who's got some big guns, right? I mean, the guy, he'll and listen, I looked at it and I couldn't believe he got knocked out with that punch. But listen, it's, again, MMA and anything can happen. So, yeah, those things happen.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the fact that he, before that, hasn't lost. It was Thiago Santos, which was a great fighter, obviously, back in 2017. But some of the guys he beat is definitely a lot better than Gastelum. And you look at Gastelum and his, last 5 fights, he lost 3 of his last 5, And he was a split decision against Souza. It wasn't like it was convincing by any means, right? And then he lost to Adonis.
Israel Adonijay, yeah. So here's the deal, right? So Kiev, let me cut you off. I know you're saying that, right? But it's impressive what he's done, brother. Listen, he beat Ronaldo Souza in Brazil, fight of the night, right? That's not easy, especially when he's going to somebody else's backyard. He lost to a champion in the decision. He split decision with Darren Till. He beat up Michael Bisping, an old one. He lost to Chris Weidman, who came back after that. So he's got some big victories. He hasn't fought. He hasn't had any tin cans. The guy's been fighting. Look, Uriah Hall, Rick Story, Jake Ellenberg, Tyrone Woodley, Nate Marquez, Neil Magny, Johnny Hendricks, Tim Kennedy. These are all he fought the best of the best, right? And those are why those losses come in. But it's the best of the best, right? I think Hermanson could be one of those guys.
Yeah, I think so too. And isn't Adonijay the champ? I think he is. And,
yes.
Last
out. Yep. It was for the interim belt that he lost. Yep.
Of the middleweight. Yeah. So you can't give him, discredit him too. Well, it's going to be a great fight here. And so I'm going to agree with you too, because it's at even money here. I like the play here at minus 110, my man.
Cool.
I got to tell you, this is going to be a great fight. I'm excited to watch it. I'm excited for their weight class. I like the little bit higher up in weight here. This is one I'm looking forward to too. So I'm really excited. But this is going to be right before the main event, so this is going to warm you up for the big main event here. Well, let's move on to
and I keep saying Hermanson, but it's Hermanson, right? So. Right. It doesn't make. I don't want you guys to think that I don't know what I'm talking about, or we don't know. It's Hermanson, right? But I think that he's going to come back with a big victory against Gastelum here. So even if you wait, I have a feeling maybe you can get a little bit better, maybe even money. But for right now, we're at minus 110 across the board.
Well, there you go. Next one, I'll lead in with. I'm going to look at. I believe it's the first fight in the main card here. We have Askarov versus Alexandre, and I always mess that up.
Let me fix it for you. It's Alexandre Pantoja.
Okay, Alexandre Pantoja. And this is going to be another fantastic bout here, because we don't know a lot about Askarov, right? He was in the, I believe the ACB a different organization for probably about 10 or 11 fights, He's not that young. He's 27. It's not like he's, coming in 23, 24 years old or anything, but he did a great job when he was there. Every single fight he had, not one of them went to decision. He beat everybody that he actually fought. So I was really impressed by that. And his opponent, obviously, Alexandre, is very good, and he's got a lot more experience, right? He's been there. He's 30 years old. He can seem to fight any way, but he's kind of one of those guys that you wonder if he's going to take this fight a little bit too lightly, I kind of wonder that, because I kind of like, just like how we bet on Yuri last week, if I like the fact that Askar is just kind of coming up with really nothing to lose. This is his first bout coming in here. So I'm just looking at it right here, and being at plus money, it's hard for me to, not take a small shot at it for like a half unit. But even if you want to get really cute, which I'm also looking at, Danny, is that he wins inside the distance at plus 515. Now, I know when Askarov did get into the UFC for the first time, he did go to decision for both of those fights. But this could be one that he has circled, being that it's on the main card here, my man. Well, I'm not going to make a play just yet until I hear what you say. Did you get a chance to look at this one?
Yeah, I did, right? So I'm going to tell you something. Alexandre is, I absolutely love the guy, right? And I bet with him against the Deiveson Figueiredo, right? Which I lost, right? Because he lost the fight. But the guy is a beast. He's like top 3, number 2 or 3 ranked inside the division. This guy is no joke, right? This guy finishes fights. He finishes fights, Kiev. You want to see a guy that's going to throw some bombs? Go look at the guy's last fight against Mashal in Korea, right? The guy that he fought has Korean roots, and the people were rooting for. He demolished him in the first round, right? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I love him. I absolutely love him as a fighter, right? But will I ever take somebody at minus 200? Very rare. Very rare. This is an opportunity that minus 200 I might do. But listen, there's a lot more value, right, with Pantoja with this fight. He's fighting against the guy who beat Tim Elliott, who's a nice fighter, and beat him, but he hasn't fought the same type of caliber that Pantoja has, right? Figueroa, who's fighting for the title here in a minute. Wilson Reyes, right? Brandon Moreno. He's fought some of the top guys, and he's beat them. And he's beat him. And here's the deal. He wins by knockout, right? He wins by submission. Very rare will he go to a decision. That if he's going to beat this kid coming up, here's a good chance of you saying, you want to know what? Let me take Pantoja and win by a TKO by plus 375. Okay? Or let me take Pantoja and get him at a submission and get even at plus 700. That's huge, right? I could see him knocking this kid out, knocking him out pretty early, mm-hmm. right? First, second round, and you're getting plus 375, right, from the guy that's a minus 200. What they're telling me here is this kid's going to go the distance, but he hasn't gone the distance against some of the top fighters in the division. And here's a new kid coming up, and he can't knock. Listen, I have a feeling that he wants to go for the title fight, right? He wants to end up getting his chance to fight for the title, and this is going to be huge. This is why I don't think he's going to step away and say, I'm fighting this young kid. I'm looking at a title here, and I need to dominate here in order to get that title fight. So it's actually a bigger shot for him. It's potential to be a setback for him if he loses than it is for his opponent to come in, Askar, and win and then jump up in the standings. There's no way he's going to get a title fight, right? So Alexandre loses this fight, Pantoja loses this fight. You think he's going to get a title fight within the next 2 or 3? Probably not. So, I'm looking at this and saying this is Alexandre Pantoja fight all the way, and I'm looking at a knockout, and I'm thinking about putting that plus 700 here.
Well, look at that. And the reason those odds are so high is because the over 2 rounds or 2.5 rounds is minus 240. You know, so they expect this to go to decision. So there you go. I mean, and so you're saying that that's not going to happen, but not even that. Pantoja is actually going to throw some roundhouses here and knock him out or submit him, which is because he wants to get that title fight. So I mean, very interesting right there. I was looking at the young kid as a shot, but you definitely talked me off that. So it sounds like you know a lot about Pantoja here. I'm going to stay away from it, but I'm really liking the angle that you're taking because you're going to take by KO for plus big money and this submission for plus big money. So liking what you're doing there, my man.
Look, a half a play on that, right? And it happens. You made your night and your next week as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You did just half unit on either side of that. You're going to be doing pretty well. So loving that, dude. So the last one I have, Danny, is the main event. I don't know if you have any other ones, so I'm going to let you go ahead and have the floor here.
You know how funny is that? Typically, we have different fights here, but yeah. Listen, I got the main event too, right? I don't know if you want me to start or you want to start, but I went back and rewatched that Figueiredo and Benavidez fight, the last one, and just to let you know, it's a vacant title, right, at 125. The guy who just retired, gosh, I forget his name.
We saw that fight when he retired right there after he won it. Was it Cueto or something?
Why is it
Cejudo?
Cejudo, Henry Cejudo.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, the king of cringe. So he was a champ at 125, right? And then he retires because he wasn't getting enough money, but it doesn't matter, right? So Benavidez and then Figueiredo are going to go down and fight at 125, which is a great weight for Benavidez, but Figueiredo is a little bit difficult for him to make that 125 cut from 135. So he ended up over, right? He was 2.5 pounds over. So it ended up not being a title fight. But my gosh, did you watch the fight again? Because I'm going to remind you that Deiveson Figueroa just absolutely demolished Benavidez. I mean, demolished him.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a father playing with the son, right? How the son's throwing punches and he's like, let me knock it here, let me knock it there. Not a big deal, not a big deal. And then absolutely destroyed him in the second round. I'm going to tell you something. Figueiredo is not the cleanest fighter. He's a little bit of a dirty fighter, right? That's difficult to have, but he's he'll hold on to that submission hold a little bit longer than he's supposed to, right? Mm-hmm. He'll throw that punch a little bit more at the very end when the referee's trying to stop him than other fighters, right? So he's a nasty, nasty man, okay? And would you believe it that Figueiredo was an underdog the last fight? I mean, Benavidez was like a minus 175, and look at it now. It's absolutely reversed, right? It's 100% reversed, right? So, to me, look, Deiveson as long as he makes weight, this fight is over and done. This guy does not lose. Have you seen his record, Kiev? Have you seen his record?
Yeah, 16-1, 18-1, depending upon what you're looking at. 18-1? Yep.
Yeah, he lost to Formiga, right, on a decision, but that is it. And he KO, decision, guillotine, KO, right? He's a man among children, especially at that weight. So Tim Elliott, he guillotined Tim Elliott in the first round, and that Tim Elliott's a fantastic jiu-jitsu player in the first. So he's nasty, right? But here, I look at it here. Do I want to lay minus 210? Right? I've got to double my bet in order to win half, right? I don't like that at all, right? So, listen, I expect this fight to end, right? And I think that Figueiredo is going to be stalking him down. If he makes his weight, he's going to do the same thing all over again, right? I feel like Benavidez is going to be nervous fighting him. He looked timid. He looked scared. Especially with everything that he was throwing, and it was like hitting mosquitoes off of him, right? Inside that, so at minus 210, minus 200, I don't mind laying it with Formiga. I'm not going to potentially do that, right? I got to think just here a little bit, but inside the distance for Figueiredo at minus 135, right? You can get Figueiredo at a TKO or a KO at plus 120. That's my best bet. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to think it's going to end within the first 3 rounds, right? He's got way too much power. So at plus 120 for a knockout, which the guy can do consistently, wow, that's a good bet right there. Now you're getting your plus money on a guy who's going to win the fight.
All right. Well, hey, man, I guess Vegas does side with you here because the under 4.5 rounds is minus 185. But everything you said, I completely agree with. I was looking at Figueiredo, and he is a dominant fighter compared to Benavidez. And I think that Benavidez will come in there and kind of remember the ass beating that he did get, because I also did look back at that one. You know, when I look at Benavidez, he did beat Henry Cejudo, right? That might have been his best win in my decision, but then he lost to Sergio Pettis after that. Then he beats an Alex Perez, Dustin Ortiz. They're, decent fighters. Justin Formiga, nothing big, I don't see any huge performances here from Benavidez, and I think just Figueiredo, his record speaks for itself at 18-1, my man. Figueiredo is the younger man. He's 32 years old. Benavidez is 35 years old. I look at that. I look at Figueiredo. He's 9 wins by KO and TKO, 6 wins by submissions, and 3 decisions. So what you're saying there makes a ton of sense that this fight might not go to decision. When I look at Benavidez, he has lost 6 times, and 4 of those times were decisions, but he does go to decision more often, and that's what frightens me a little bit more off of taking it in the distance. With me, Danny, I have absolutely no problem laying the minus 210. In my opinion, this thing should be about minus 250 or minus 275, and I think it's going to probably close around minus 235 or minus 240, and the fact that I can get it at minus 210, get half my bet back, I just don't see Figueiredo losing this fight. And they know that this is for the championship. He had that hiccup, but he's not going to have a hiccup again. He's too good of a fighter for that. He's way too good of a fighter. He's also got a reach advantage, legs.
He's a big 125er, brother. If he makes that weight, listen, I'm going to tell you, the fight opened up at minus 150, right? Right now he's at minus 220, right, Figueiredo? So, listen, you know where the money's going, right? You could have got him a long time ago at minus 150 and felt really, really good, right? But, yeah, the only thing that's going to stop him is that weight to 125 from 135, because he is a big boy. He's a big boy. Yeah, he's a big boy. He's got a leg reach, 38-inch leg reach, while Benavidez has 68 inches of reach with his arms, 65 inches for Joseph Benavidez. He's got him by an inch. He's an inch taller, but he looks taller than me. He looks taller than that. I think he's probably really got him by about an inch and a half to 2 inches. Yeah. Significant strikes, 52%. He's landing to 33% for Benavidez. So I think this 210's fine, and I'm going to make this a premium play as well. I'm probably going to make it a 3-star premium play. I just think no matter what happens, it's going to be Figueiredo to win this championship. Anything else that you want to throw in, Danny, before we get going? No, I just love these fights. I think they're so much fun, and I think it's $6 a month for ESPN Plus. And there was some fights last night that we didn't cover, right? But those were fun to watch, right? A lot of them went to decision, right? But look, if you $6, it's cheaper than buying the pay-per-view, and I think a lot of these guys are going to try to get and win. by knockout so they can get in the UFC and do a good show. So I have a feeling it's going to be a good card and we'll have some fun with it.
All right. I do too, my man. But hey, we got a lot of fights coming up, so we're probably going to have to ask you back to come back next week, Danny.
Anytime for you, my man. Anytime.
This is some great stuff. UFC's been fantastic. We're on a roll right now. Also hit our Wednesday premium play. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this podcast. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review. Have a fantastic time watching these fights. And huge thank you, of course, to Cub Fan Danny to come on, my man, and go get some winners.